Hi everyone, welcome back for my second episode of Sourdough Sarah. Today we're going to be making your very own simple sourdough bread using your very own starter. Today I'm going to show you how to feed your starter, how to get it ready for baking, how to mix the dough, and I'll talk a little bit about the rising process and what you're going to do to bake it. I allowed for my starter to sit on the counter. This is about a half day's worth, and it's kind of hard to tell, but it's pretty much full to the brim here. So now we're ready to start to use it. I'm going to show you how I would test my starter to just make sure that it's ready to use. So the way that I test my starter is I perform a float test. A float test is simply just dropping your hydrated starter into a container of water and seeing if it floats. If it floats, then it's ready to be used. I'm going to go ahead and take some of my starter. So you can see how the starter is able to sort of sit on top of the water. When I move it around, you can see that it's not clinging to the bottom of the bowl. And that's sort of just what you're looking for, is that there's been a lot of air that's been able to trap, and it's able to help it sort of sit at the top. So now I'm just going to continue to add the remainder of the starter. I use an approximate measurement of at least 2/3 cup starter, but I like to just spoon it in until I see that I've reached the desired amount of water to starter ratio that I'm looking for. So this is the starter added to my water. So I portioned out 4 cups of flour within this container, and I'm just going to add that to my mixture, and I'm going to beat it all together with this kneading device. So now that my dough is mostly formed, I'm going to go ahead and add the salt. And I'm just going to go and work the salt in by hand so I can make sure that it's nice and evenly combined. I don't want the salt to get diluted in the water, so that's why I just add it in afterwards, so then I know that it's going to stay granulized and within my dough. So now that our dough is formed, I'm going to let this sit in this container covered for 30 minutes, and while this is resting, I'm going to go and show you how we're going to refeed the starter. Add in some water and flour back into my starter. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix out any of those clumps and really try to get as much air into my mixture as possible. Okay, so now that I refed my starter, I can either cover it, put it in the refrigerator, and use it next week, or I have the option of letting it sit out and baking with it again tomorrow. Okay, I've let my dough rest for 30 minutes. I'm just going to go ahead and knead the dough a little bit further before I let it sit for its bulk fermentation. So while I'm going ahead and I'm trying to stretch out those gluten strands in my dough, I just want to talk about the fermentation process that this dough is going to go through. The goal of the fermentation is to allow the bread to rise naturally. So because your starter already has yeast that was found in the air, and that's what sort of causes that flour to be pre-digested. So what that yeast is doing is it's going in and it's going to eat and break down all of those pieces of gluten, or those starches and sugars, and it's going to turn them ultimately into CO2 gases. And those gases are what's going to cause the air bubbles that you're going to see. Okay, so now that I have my nice stretched out ball, I'm going to put it back into the original container, cover it, and let it sit on the counter overnight. So I'm going to be going and uncovering the dough that I've let sit out overnight. And you can see that it's risen quite a lot since where it was before. And I'm just sort of able to poke at it, and it has like a nice airy texture to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to scrape out with clean hands the dough from the container. So now you're going to begin shaping your dough on a lightly floured work surface so it can begin its proofing. Now the proofing is just going to allow your dough to have a nice shape and to let it re-rise after you've shaped it. So now this is the point where you can decide if you want your dough to be a long baguette type of shape, if you want it to be that sort of loaf, or if you want it to be a traditional artisan type shape. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flour my work surface. I'm just begin by taking my dough and stretching it out and folding all four corners. Now that I have my circle, I'm going to go and let this rest for 30 minutes to an hour while I let my oven preheat to 475. So I have my middle pot with my lid. I'm just going to go ahead and remove the lid, pick up my bread, and place it down in the center of my pot. And then I'm going to go ahead and cover it. This is going to go ahead in the preheated oven for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to go ahead and remove the top and let it continue to bake for another 25 minutes. So here's our freshly baked and risen dough. It should be a pretty simple recipe, only 3 ingredients, and at the end you'll have a nice, warm, happy loaf that you could use for sandwiches, French toast, really anything. And when you cut into it, you should be able to see nice, large air bubbles. I hope that you enjoyed today's video and that you enjoy the bread even more.